That dehumanization provides the legal basis for the extremity of the tortures they prescribed.
It does.
So for this deep dive, we can't just list the penalties. We need to get into the intent behind them. Let's start with the crime of running away, especially for the ringleaders.
For ringleaders, the punishment was forfeiture of life, but it was preceded by a public torture spectacle. The accused would be pinched with red-hot tongs at 3 different places on their body before being executed by hanging.
The use of tongs, like you'd use to mark property to brand cattle.
Precisely. It underscored their status as chattel, not human beings, right before the public execution. It was pure theater of terror.
And if you were just seduced into running away, not a ringleader.
You still faced the threat of losing one leg. And even if your master decided to show clemency and spare you that, you still faced 150 lashes and having one of your ears cut off.
So the mutilation served as a permanent public marker of defiance.
A walking warning to others. And the code specifically targeted long-term marronage. If you were a maroon for 12 weeks or ran away multiple times, you would forfeit a leg.
A punishment designed to cripple your ability to work, run, or ever resist again.
And if you somehow managed to stay marooned for over 6 months, your life was forfeited, period. Unless, again, a master intervened to mercifully just enforce the loss of a leg.
Yeah.
The law was designed to make the wilderness itself a death trap.
What about insubordination? Raising a hand against a white person, or even just using threats or proud words?
That was met with immediate lethal consequences. The punishment was torture with red-hot tongs in 3 places, followed by hanging if the white person demanded it.
Or
Alternatively, amputation of the right hand.
the right hand. The hand used for labor, for self-defense.
Yes. The symbolism is intentional. The punishment wasn't just to hurt, it was to disable the very capacity for future resistance or labor.
The fear of poisoning among the planter class was notorious in the Caribbean. How did the code address that?
Oh, this was reserved for the most horrifying public spectacle imaginable. It was intended to terrify the entire population into absolute submission.
What was the punishment?
The code demanded the accused be pinched with red tongs at 3 places, then broken on the wheel, and finally put on the stake alive.
Alive.
The spectacle of slow, agonizing death was the intended deterrent. I mean, that section alone just speaks volumes about the level of paranoia and desperation among the Danish authorities.
And beyond this spectacular violence, the code also aimed to micromanage daily life, didn't it? To squash any form of cultural autonomy.
Yes, absolutely. Slaves were forbidden from carrying iron-fitted sticks or knives, though they had to make a practical exception for machetes as tools.
And there was a curfew.
A strict curfew. After the drum sounded, any enslaved person seen outside was seized by the patrol and received a sound thrashing. The system relied on constant patrols and perpetual fear.
And critically, it targeted cultural and spiritual resistance. It banned obia, which the Danes called taurmeri.
Which means magic doings.
And it also banned large social gatherings for dancing or feasts, the Baliarder and Jeras, which were often held in memory of the dead.
And this was a direct attack on community and collective identity. The Danes understood that collective cultural practice was a form of political organizing.
So by threatening severe flogging for participating in cultural events, they were trying to atomize the population, keep them isolated.
Keep them isolated and afraid.
What's so fascinating here is the unintended consequence of all this. This horrific code, intended to restore order, actually gave the Akwamu leaders the political argument they needed.
Precisely. I mean, think about it. If you're facing certain slow starvation from crop failure, and the penalty for running away to find food is the loss of a limb or agonizing public torture and death.
Which the code guaranteed.
Then organized armed revolt, which offered at least the potential for sovereignty and a new future, suddenly becomes a rational, even less terrifying choice than passive defiance.
The code finalized the transition from scattered survival attempts to open warfare.
It was the final push.
So the motivation was absolute, the political goal was clear. Let's move into the execution of the revolt. November 23rd, 1733. Who were the key individuals and what was their tactical genius?
The leaders were all high-ranking Akwamu political figures. They included a man named King June, who was the foreman on the Sutman estate.
So he was in a position of some authority already.
Yes, and that was common. Along with him were key military figures like Kanta, King Bolombo, Prince Akwasi, and Oberfour. Reports, especially those the French seized later, indicate these leaders met regularly at night for months, meticulously planning the precise logistics of the takeover.
And the tactical start was brilliant in its simplicity. It began early in the morning, November 23rd, at the island's defensive heart, the Coral Bay Fort, Fort Fredericksburg.
A group of enslaved people approached the fort under the guise of delivering firewood. It was a routine task, something that wouldn't arouse any suspicion.
But concealed inside those bundles of wood
Were cane knives. Once inside, they used these concealed weapons to overwhelm and kill most of the surprised Danish soldiers stationed there. The precision required for that initial ambush speaks volumes about their level of organization.
One soldier, John Gabriel, managed to hide and then escape to St. Thomas to raise the alarm, but by then the fort was decisively seized.
And capturing the fort was the tactical victory. The signal was the political statement. The rebels immediately fired the fort's cannon, some sources say 3 shots, which was the prearranged signal for the island-wide insurrection to begin simultaneously.
And one of the most pivotal figures, a person whose name is now recognized as a key revolutionary, responded instantly to that signal. A woman named Brefu.
Yes. Enslaved on Peter Creer's plantation, she's now known by islanders as the Queen of St. John.
And her actions were immediately decisive.
Absolutely. Upon hearing the cannon, she and her followers burst into the main house, killing Creer and his wife. They seized the guns and, crucially, the ammunition stores.
Then they moved on.
They moved rapidly to the neighboring Van Stel family house and killed 3 members there. Her leadership was immediate, military, and brutal.
So the rebellion is in full swing, and the rebel forces numbering about 150, and we should emphasize these were almost exclusively Akwamu. They divided into specific military detachments.
Right, they split the island geographically. King June stayed at the fort to secure that key supply and communication point. King Juni led a group eastward along the coastline, and King Clays traveled westward through the island's difficult interior.
They were moving systematically, focusing on eliminating the slaveholders and overseers.
But this is where their political goal becomes so clear in their actions. As they swept across the estates, they were very careful to avoid generalized destruction.
They didn't burn the sugar mills, they didn't destroy the processing equipment, they preserved the cash crops.
Because that preservation was the heart of the Akwamu sovereignty plan. They didn't want the island destroyed. They wanted it intact so they could immediately assume control and resume sugar production for their own benefit.
Establishing a self-sustaining state that maintained the economic engine.
It shows a sophisticated understanding of colonial economics. They knew that controlling the means of production was synonymous with political power.
So was their initial phase purely military, or did they try to set up any kind of administrative structures right away?
Initially, it was a rapid military consolidation, seizing weapons, eliminating Danish authority, securing supplies. Their longer-term administrative plan really centered on using the existing foreman structure, which was often filled by Akwamu like King June, to transition seamlessly back into forced labor, just with new masters at the top.
So continuity of production, not chaos.
That was the goal.
Now, let's look at the resistance they faced, which didn't just come from the panicked Europeans.
No, and this is crucial. The planter resistance was immediate, if scattered. Many small planters just fled in boats to St. Thomas. Those who remained retreated to one major stronghold, Dorlo's plantation.
Which we know today as Canil Bay.
Right. And this became the main European defensive position, fortified by the remaining white planters and, significantly, by those enslaved people who remained loyal to their masters.
And that role of loyal slaves points directly back to that ethnic schism you mentioned earlier. It's an uncomfortable but vital detail.
It is. The divide was deep. On estates like Cinnamon Bay, for instance, loyal slaves helped the landowners, the Jansen brothers, hold off the initial Akwamu attack.
Giving them enough time to escape to Durlos.
Exactly. And these loyalists, who were often from the Accra Nation, they remembered Akwamu dominance back in West Africa.
So they weren't looking at the Akwamu as liberators. They were seeing them as potentially worse conquerors than the Danes.
Precisely. They feared the Akwamu would simply replace the Danish oppressors with new Akwamu masters, which, given the Akwamu's stated goals, was a very well-founded fear.
And as a result, the majority of the enslaved population did not join the revolt.
Not only did they not join, many actively sided with the Europeans, providing crucial intelligence and manpower that proved critical in defending strongholds like Durlos. This internal division was a fatal weakness for the Akwamu.
So Durlo's plantation held out. They repelled several Akwamu attacks.
They did, though the rebels did manage to inflict damage. They set fire to the munitions magazine at one point, which shows they came very close to overwhelming that final European stronghold.
And for 6 months, the Akwamu held military control over most of the island. They were engaged in a continuous, successful war of attrition.
Yes, against the remaining Europeans and their loyalist African forces.
Meanwhile, the Danish authorities were failing miserably to suppress the revolt, even with help from St. Thomas. How were 150 rebels able to continuously defeat organized Danish military attempts?
Well, the Aquamwi fighters were often professional warriors, and they possessed intimate knowledge of St. John's incredibly rugged and mountainous terrain.
Home field advantage.
A massive one. The Danish forces sent from St. Thomas were ill-equipped, unfamiliar with the jungle landscape. The Akwamu used effective guerrilla tactics, ambushing Danish columns, using the terrain to negate the Danes' advantages in numbers and weapons.
So Governor Gardeland's efforts were repeatedly repulsed. The Danes couldn't solve their own crisis.
Not even close. And the problem was clearly recognized beyond the Danish sphere. The British got involved.
Right, they were terrified this successful slave state would spread revolution to their own islands, like nearby Tortola.
So they dispatched a British warship with 60 troops. But again, the Akwamu demonstrated superior tactical skill. They ambushed the British soldiers the moment they came ashore.
Wounding 4 and forcing an immediate, humiliating retreat back to Tortola.
It confirmed that the Akwamu could defeat professional European military forces when fighting on their own territory.
So after 6 months of failure by both Danish and British forces, it became clear that the only way to quell this incredibly successful revolt was through massive external foreign intervention.
Which meant the Danes had to turn to their geopolitical rivals, the French.
A desperate move. The existence of a successful rebel state was an existential threat to the entire Caribbean plantation system, regardless of which flag flew over it.
Exactly. The Danes had to swallow their pride and ask for help.
So what motivated the French, their rivals, to agree to this costly intervention in the spring of 1734?
Geopolitics and trade. The Danes had recently promised neutrality in the ongoing War of the Polish Succession, which was valuable to the French. And the Danish West India Company had just purchased the neighboring island of St. Croix from the French.